All right, I'm going to give you a shout out when I park. For now, I am on the road. That is referring to soy sauce. Soy sauce, I hear you loud and clear. I'll give you a shout out when I park. But right now, I can't use my phone. Shout out to you. Soy sauce 33. Shout out to you. Love you.
Released. So the researchers in Hawaii found that both San Andreas and Jacinto faults are now carrying more pent-up stress than at any other point in the past millennia. And it's a state that they're calling critically loaded. So the two fault systems being loaded to similar pressure makes them more likely to influence one another.
Okay, so an earthquake along one could cause another one along the other.
Exactly. The researchers singled out a junction called Cajon Pass, which is where the two fault lines meet. These kinds of junctions act as like gates that decide whether a rupture jumps from one fault line to another. So if the gate's closed, it's a barrier that stops earthquakes from rippling along the entire fault line. But when it's open, an earthquake could affect both of those fault lines. And the researchers say that their model suggests that what opens that gate is if the two fault lines are similarly loaded with stress, and they are. So taken together, an overdue major earthquake, fault lines under record high stress levels, and fault systems networked together could produce a mega quake that just ripples across almost the entire state.
Tristan, that sounds terrifying. At least it gives some small relief because we know it's coming. So what are scientists doing to prepare?
Well, if you live in California, you probably know that there are a lot of systems in place should the big one strike. So the entire west coast of the United States has access to something called Shake Alert, and that system utilizes nearly 1,700 seismic sensors across the west coast. When the system is activated, it can trigger warnings that are sent to your phone and trigger safeguard systems that slow down public transit to prevent derailments. It can also close water and gas utility valves and activate backup generators. So while the concern is real, preparations are real also.
Thank you, Tristan. It's probably worth also saying that if you do find yourself experiencing an earthquake, the advice is to drop, cover and hold on. So drop your hands and knees so that you don't fall over. Cover yourself with whatever shelter you can find, like a sturdy table, and then hold on to that shelter until the shaking stops. I mean, I say that like I've experienced one, which I never have, so I bet loads of our listeners do email those in to the rest of us. The email is co.uk. Still to come on Digital Life.
Hello, Ella here with this Unexpected Elements quiz. The discovery of a 150-year overdue library book in a fireplace had us wondering about other things that can survive against the odds in remarkable places. Back in 2024, researchers in Oxford compiled records of thousands of bodies spanning 12,000 years, which have been found in areas like peat bogs and lake beds. Strangely, the team discovered that in around 1,300 of the bodies, one organ was preserved amongst otherwise skeletonized remains. So, my question is, which was the only organ that survived in these ancient skeletons? A, the liver, B, the brain, C, the lungs. Which was the only organ that survived in these ancient skeletons? A, the liver, B, the brain, C, the lungs. Have a think, and I'll be back with the answer soon.
You're listening to Unexpected Elements from the BBC World Service. After a borrowed library book was found returned to an Australian library 150 years late, we're exploring discovered things, overdue things, and more. Now, libraries are most known as places to take out books, but many of them also contain archives, keeping and maintaining all kinds of documents and records from our history. In a digital world, how do we store something that's not physical? And how do we protect it from everything the world might throw at it? That's where the Arctic World Archive comes in, a huge digital archive full of data on a remote Norwegian island and home to the GitHub Code Vault. Here to tell us more about the science of preserving digital things for the future is Martin Woodward, Vice President of Developer Relations at GitHub. Welcome to Unexpected Elements.
Thank you for having me.
So, what is a GitHub Code Vault? And is it genuinely on this remote island?
In IT, we store source code for all the software that you all use every day, and we store that most commonly nowadays in an application called Git, which is unfortunately named for the UK listeners, but it's just what it's called. So when you're storing source code, you're building it, you have a copy of your source code locally with all the history, and you commonly share it with a site like GitHub to share that with the world.
Say source code. So for someone who's not looking at code on a daily basis, I mean, what kind of things am I doing that are based on code?
Everything you touch, everything that's on a computer, from your phone to your operating system to the website you visit, is created using code. And that code is made up of source code. That's the instruction that humans originally, now increasingly humans with AI, write to be able to turn out instructions that the computer uses.
Okay, so there's the backup of the instructions, and then there's the super duper backup.
Yeah, exactly. So we use what's called a lots philosophy. So lots of copies keep stuff safe, you know. You do it on your machine, you share it with us, and give us a copy. But we thought, well, that's not good enough. We need to do better than this. So we have lots of archives of that. And then we work with a set of experts on how can we archive the world's open source software? How can we take snapshots of that and put it somewhere safe? So we have a copy of like the most popular open source software. We have that in the Berlin Library, in Alexandra Biblioteca, in Stanford Library, in like a pretty box. Because it turns out humanity values pretty things, so that in 100, 1,000 years time, somebody will see that and think, oh, this must have value. What is it? With the Arctic code vaults, what we did was all of the open source software in the world that's on GitHub, and we put it onto essentially film, and then we buried it in a coal mine, in an abandoned coal mine in Svalbard, which is sort of round the corner from where the Arctic sea was, and things like that. And again, buried it in a pretty, essentially a large storage container that looks nice, along with instructions of how to take the information off these films and convert it back into readable, computer instructions, and then a whole tech tree which explains this is what source code is, this is what a compiler is, because again, we have to assume if something comes along in 1,000 years time, they might have forgotten what this is all about, so we kind of explain that too.
I love that you put the instructions on what to do with the instructions in the same place. This is good forward thinking. What language is that in?
It's lots of different programming languages, and in those programming languages as well contain, instructions in lots of others. And then the actual instructions for rebuilding it were done in sort of 5 different languages, Chinese, English, and a few other different languages as well, just to make sure that it's kind of a Rosetta Stone of how to reassemble the source code and what's not coded in this. And the medium we picked, this film, was very deliberately picked because it has a long archive life, over 1,000 years we hope, but it's also easy to read. It's essentially, QR codes that you see all around. It's essentially lots of QR codes on a film. So if you bring it up and look at it, you can see these are QR codes, and so you get a hint as to how to read it. Like if you archive things on DVD-ROMs or magnetic tapes, you need very specialized equipment, and you need quite a high technology standard to be able to decode that information. This is a much more deliberately done high-tech, while being also low-tech and easy to decode.
Katie, why do we need more code? Like if this is found in 10 or 20, 50 years from now, is it almost like just finding like the code for one like a Nokia 3510? And is this not going to be obsolete as AI and everything replaces it with more code?
Code changes rapidly. We interesting date to take a snapshot of the source code, because not only was it just sort of the COVID pandemic, it was also taken before AI came in and helped us write code. So every line of code in the artwork is actually handwritten by a human, and that's in the last 6 years how we write code has changed dramatically. On the 2nd of February 2020, we took a grab of everything that was public, so everything that was open source. We also gave people the ability to opt out, so some people would say they didn't and we gave them that ability, but to be honest, not many people took that opportunity. People were pretty excited about like living in a vault in the Arctic and sort of thing. We didn't make any editorial decisions for the Arctic vault, it was everything. We have preserved the Linux operating system, the Android operating system, those things are preserved. There is a copy of the source code that was used for the lunar lander and the Apollo mission. That was okay, but that's included. The source code that was used to power the JPL, the Mars helicopter, things like that are all done in open source, and they're all included. So I think what's also fascinating about the Arctic archive, because it is so big, is it includes all the kind of unimportant stuff that regular people are doing, that again future archivists, future historians can make judgment calls on and go see, what was this person doing, what was interesting to everybody else, so we don't have to predict what will be interesting to historians in the future.
Well, Martin, thank you so much for coming onto the show and sharing the secrets of the
Thank you. Goodbye.
So, the overdue library book took us via the wintry meteorite monster and an overdue earthquake in California to a mine in Norway. It's a digital vault. Still to come on the show, penguin vaccinators eclipse etiquette, and if you're smelling something really stinky, can you convert that into universal smell? That's coming up shortly. This is the BBC World Service, where the documentary podcast explores extraordinary stories from every corner of our world.
How did you that feel when you put your hands to her? These are the words. If you put that box on your head, don't call me your father again.
By one reading it, essentially what they mean is that you can still leave Belarus, but you cannot go back. Or you can go back at the price of your own freedom.
One study found that if all the world's workforce was with other people because of AI, 59 of those will end up scaling by 2030.
My kids all grew up in Russians. And I remember on a rocking chair, I said, you brought your family. You must think American children have the same values as other children. I said, I do. A million stories and more.
The Documentary Podcast. To listen, search BBC The Documentary online or wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Coming up after the news. As bird flu comes to Australia and New Zealand, we hear about the penguin vaccinators fighting back. Also, if you can measure sound in decibels, what are the units that help you quantify the gentle waft of a rose or the intense stink of a durian fruit? That, plus the dying art of reading a book and what it does to your brain. Coming up shortly on Unexpected Elements.
BBC News' Fiona MacDonald. Rescuers in Ukraine have pulled another body from the rubble of a shopping centre in Kryvyi Rih, which was targeted by Russian drones on Friday, bringing the number of dead to 16. 9 people are still missing. 130 were wounded in the attack. The US Supreme Court says work can temporarily resume on a new White House ballroom, while judges weigh an appeal against a challenge to the project. The decision pauses a lower court ruling demanding a halt to construction. Canada's top trade negotiator has said there is more work to do to reach a trade deal with Washington. The deadline, after which steep US tariffs on a range of Canadian goods come into effect, is just half an hour away. TikTok has agreed to pay $400 million to settle a case with the US government over claims it violated children's online privacy laws. The US Justice Department has accused the platform of illegally collecting children's information. Mexico's government has said a decision by the governor of Sinaloa, Rubén Rocha Moya, to return to office after a 3-month absence is a personal choice. An investigation into charges of drug trafficking against him and 9 others named by the US Department of Justice is continuing. The Trump administration has re-emphasized its opposition to Israel annexing the West Bank. However, the State Department has avoided condemning Israeli plans to build a large new settlement on the so-called E1 area. The FBI has returned 48 looted artifacts to Egypt. It comes after an investigation confirmed they had been illegally removed from the country. And China's World Humanoid Robot Games open in Beijing this weekend, the second edition of the event. More than 2,000 robots from 16 countries will take part. BBC News.
This is Unexpected Elements from the BBC World Service, the science show inspired by the news. I'm Mornie Chesterton in Cardiff, in Wales, and I'm joined by Katie Silver in Sydney, Australia, and
Tristan Outone in Helsinki, Finland.
so the three of us read a lot of news and journal papers, and this is the bit of the show where our lovely panelists bring a story from their part of the world, something that's gone under the radar of global news, and we share it with our World Service audiences. Spread the love, or at least the knowledge. And as ever, if you can link it to this week's theme, you may receive some definitely useful in real life bonus points. So Katie, you are up. Can you link the theme, which is a library book that was returned 150 years late, and your story?
I think ever so slightly. So both Australian, both famous tourist sites in Australia, and maybe also, sadly, scientists have gotten a little bit late to these penguins as well.
Ooh, you're teasing me with penguins. Okay.
How's that for a hint?
Points for anything that involves penguins, frankly. Tell me more.
So the government in Australia says that it's going to be vaccinating animals en masse against the H5N1 bird flu virus that's ripping around the world, with risks, of course, to ecological devastation. One of the species they're targeting is quite cute. As I say, it's these fairy penguins.
I've never heard of fairy penguins. Tristan, are they on your radar?
They are not, but they will be from here on out.
I'm pleased to bring them to you. They're absolutely adorable. So, look them up on images in your free time. And basically, there's a colony of 40,000 of these tiny little fairy penguins on Phillip Island in Victoria, not far from Melbourne. It's the largest colony of the species in the world, and these are the world's smallest penguins. It's also a massive tourism draw card. The penguins parade each night. Now, because they live in such close proximity, they're considered one of the most at-risk groups if bird flu was to spread between them. And so the government has said that they're going to be a top priority species to vaccinate.
How exactly do you go about vaccinating wild, tiny penguins? I'm guessing you just don't like chasing around.
Well, you'd have to be pretty quick, Tristan, so you have to do it very carefully and at night. And the tricky part is that these vaccines need 2 doses. So they come ashore each evening, and then officials corral them into an area where they get their first dose. They get microchipped, and then they're released back to their burrows, and then that's, as I say, the tricky bit is that you have to catch them again. It's a huge undertaking, and they're trying to vaccinate about 5,000 of them. They're also deliberately keeping staff numbers on the ground relatively low to try and reduce the biosecurity risk to the birds and as well the humans that are handling them.
Okay, so that could take a while with 5,000 penguins to vaccinate and only a small number of people able to vaccinate them. And am I right in thinking that there's been the first reported death of a penguin in Australia from bird flu?
Yes, or one of these penguins, and that's the worry. So last weekend, just days before the rollout was due to begin, a little penguin on Phillip Island was confirmed to have died from the virus, and it was found in a different part of the island to the parade site. So there is hopes that it hasn't spread quite as much as it may have, but it has still raised alarm because there was modelling that was done back in May last year that warned that vaccinating a colony against the virus, if the virus has already been detected, it will likely be too late. Now the concern is that significant deaths could happen before enough of the population is protected. And officials say they're aware of that risk, but that the advice is to basically just keep moving as fast and safely as possible regardless, and yeah, it may well accelerate the plan.
Okay, so what happens now?
Well, this is part of an Australian government-wide rollout that's happening in different states and territories across Australia, and basically the various states have been told to identify the priority species for vaccination. And interestingly, it's not just birds. So one ecologist that I spoke with and interviewed about this said that priority species might be things like orange-bellied parrots, regent honeyeaters, herald petrels, but also things like Australian sea lions, Tasmanian devils, and eastern quolls, which was the expert that I spoke with. He was particularly concerned about eastern quolls, his area.
What's a quoll?
A carnivorous marsupial, about a couple of hand sizes.
Oh, they're cute.
It is very cute. One of the 6 extant species of quolls, endemic to Australia, occur on the island of Tasmania, and they were considered extinct on the mainland after 1963. So just a little Australian animal for you, Marty. The reason these animals that I mentioned are particularly vulnerable is because they have small declining populations. They don't have a great deal of genetic diversity in order to have much immunity. There's relatively concentrated breeding, and so that means that if there's an outbreak, it could disproportionately spread and have very big impacts across the entire population. So in general, the government said that they're going to try to start rolling out these vaccines to animals in captivity, as they're easier to vaccinate and potentially as well more at risk or more endangered. But the ecologist I spoke with was really quite seriously worried about what this would mean for biodiversity and wildlife losses. And as I say, vaccination's being treated as a useful tool, but not really a silver bullet. So this is one measure, but it's likely going to be a very long, hard fight.
See, I mean, I can see vaccinating Tasmanian devils in captivity being an easy one. I don't know how you find them in the wild. Well, thank you, Katie. I guess best of luck to the penguin vaccinators, right? I mean, that's a job title to brag about at parties. But more seriously, I mean, having watched the devastation from H5N1 in my bit of the world, I do hope that vaccination can make a difference. We've come to that part of the show where we rifle through our inbox to find out what you have had to say about past shows. So, as I bragged, I was off last week looking at the total solar eclipse that swept through Europe, and whilst I was doing that, Alex Lathbridge took over and did a show based on it. Well, listener Michael from Minnesota in the US took umbrage at something Alex said. Tristan, do you want to read out his message?
Sure. So Michael said, in the first few minutes of the show, Alex said, as crowds watched on, hopefully with their special protective eclipse glasses firmly in place, no, total solar eclipse viewers must remove protective eclipse glasses during totality. Otherwise, the viewer will completely miss the eclipse. The corona is only visible during the few minutes of totality. The magnificent solar corona is the main point of viewing total eclipse of the sun. Eclipse glasses completely block the solar corona. All caps.
Lots of caps. Thank you, Michael. Let's set the record straight for anyone who wants to watch the next one. Yes, you should never look directly at the surface of the sun, and eclipse glasses are absolutely necessary if you're trying to look at that bit where the moon is partially covering the sun. But yes, during the brief moments of totality, when the moon's completely covered the sun, you can look directly without the glasses and catch a glimpse of the corona. So that's the outermost layer of the sun, which is millions of degrees hotter than the surface. Just as important as what's going on the sun, you kind of need to take the glasses off just to see everyone else and to notice that it's dark, because it will just be completely dark if you've got your glasses on. So absolutely. take them off during the totality. Now, how much totality time you get will depend on where in the world you are, so it's best to check so that you don't get caught out at the end. The advice from NASA is you'll know it's safe to look when you can no longer see any part of the sun through either eclipse glasses or a solar viewer. And as soon as you can see even a little bit of bright sun reappear after totality, stick your glasses back on. I hope that helps anyone looking to see the next total eclipse on the 2nd of August 2027. Katie, Tristan, have either of you seen a total eclipse?
I haven't. I'd love to. Tristan?
I have. With my dad, y'all actually had him send in an audio postcard of this experience actually a couple of years back. So that was when I went through Texas, and like, I'll admit, I thought like the solar eclipse was cool, but didn't think it was actually like as kind of life-changing until I went and saw it. So it sounds like similar to you, Marty. I was just really being in awe. I was like, oh, this could be a really cool experience. And I was like, oh man, I would love to do that again if I had the opportunity. So yeah, it's a fun thing to do.
So all of the scientists that I spoke to about the eclipse this year, I said, is there any science that you will be doing that I can come and hold a microphone next to you? And they went, yeah, well, obviously the 2027 eclipse is the really scientifically important one. And I was like, oh, is it? Interesting. Tell me more, because there's going to be a longer totality, and so there's more time to stare at the bit of the corona that you can't no longer see. So I'm keeping in touch with them, and hopefully there's going to be some interesting science experiments. So maybe we can just relocate the show next August to there.
South Spain next August sounds good.
Yeah, call me up. I'm ready to go.
Now, to my absolute joy, the postman has just dropped off a load of actual physical post, and we're going to go through these, but let's start with a couple for now. A few weeks ago, we explored the fantastical world of Alice in Wonderland, and David from Slough in England has sent in a lovely wooden postcard. Cheshire Cat, we're all mad here, and it says the recent programme on Alice and her adventures was music to my ears. Well done. Always enjoy your shows. Must go or I'll be late. White Rabbit, aka David. Thank you. Good Alice in Wonderland reference. We also received a card from John in this fair city, Cardiff. John said, I thought you and the team might enjoy these unexpected elements. And it is a card of the periodic table, and on the front it says this.
Tabl cyfnodol yr elfennau. That's periodic table of elements in Cymraeg or Welsh.
Thank you to Joyce for the translation. And beneath that we have all the elements with their Welsh spelling. Love it. I'm so excited when we get physical post. I'm just like a kid at Christmas. Katie, do you still send postcards?
I haven't sent one in quite a while, but this is inspiring me to get back into them.
I buy them and then I'll never get round to actually posting them.
I have the same problem as like a stack of postcards, which will one day I hope become like a wall of like places I've visited.
Yes,
And
exactly.
just wanted to share the experience, but never got around to it.
Thank you to everyone who's written in, and just a reminder that if you want to get in touch, we are available on unexpected@bbc.co.uk, or the WhatsApp number is +44 330 678 3080. You can use that to send us a WhatsApp or a voice note. And if you want to contribute to our mega pile of postcards, you can send those to Unexpected Elements, BBC World Service, Cardiff CF10 4GA. Still to come on the show, what are the units of smell, and what is not reading doing to your brain? That's coming up after this.
Ella, back with the answer to the quiz. Earlier, I asked you what was the only organ that survived in around 1,300 ancient skeletons. A, the liver, B, the brain, C, the lungs. And the answer is B, the brain. When brain tissue starts to decay, it produces highly reactive molecules called free radicals. In oxygen-rich conditions, these radicals trigger a chain reaction that breaks proteins apart. But new research suggests that In low oxygen, waterlogged environments, like where the skeletons were discovered, chain reaction stalls, and this happens at the stage where free radicals cause protein fragments to bond together as stable clumps, and these clumps resist further decay. This research was done on mice, so it may not be the reason human brains lasted so long, but it's a good clue. Well done if you got that right. If not, better luck next time.
Our inbox is always open to your thoughts, feelings, and memories, but it's also the place for your questions. Questions that you'd rather put to an expert, not AI. In fact, I'd like you to think of us as the carrier pigeon of internet searches. Welcome to Ask the Unexpected. Yes, it's slow, but it's steady. You send in a question. Each week we might pick it out, and then we handpick a scientist with the expertise to answer it. This question comes from listener David, who asks, how do you measure the strength of a smell, or touch, or a taste? Sound can be measured in decibels, sight with an optician's vision chart. Good question. Are there units of smell, or touch, or taste? Well, over to Professor of Sensory and Consumer Science at Nottingham University, Rebecca Ford.
Well, it's a great question, David. And the senses like smell, taste and touch, we can measure the physical stimulus. So, for example, the concentration of an odour in the air can be measured in parts per million. The amount of salty water measured in grams per litre, or the force or pressure applied to the skin can be measured in newtons or pascals. But that doesn't actually tell us how strong it feels to a human. So psychophysics is the branch of science that fills the gap. And psychophysics studies how, for example, the concentration of salty water becomes a sensation that is perceived by the taste receptors in the tongue.
Sleeping, man. No sleeping, no sleeping, no sleeping.
For example, the lowest concentration that person would notice that something tastes salty. Or the overall intensity, so how salty is this on a scale, so from maybe not detectable at all to strongest imaginable sensation. That last part of measuring intensity on a scale might sound a bit subjective, but if it's done really carefully and across many people, where they're trained on how to use the scale, it does actually become a scientific measurement of perception. And that also applies to sound and vision, because decibels is actually the physical intensity of the sound, but loudness would be the perceived strength, so the human judgment of that physical intensity. And in the same way, the optician's chart measures visual acuity, but not the overall perceived strength of that sound. Thank you, Professor Rebecca Ford. That was a very good answer. So, psychophysics, why aren't you come across psychophysics?
I didn't have a term, but I know that, for example, you measure distances being further than wearing a heavy backpack. When I did psych at uni, that was something that, you might say that's 100 metres, you put on a big backpack, and all of a sudden it's 300 metres, because you're relating it to how much effort it would be exerted to kind of get there. So I kind of think that's highly psychophysics.
That's fascinating. So, how physical stimuli get translated into human perception is a whole area. And relative to what you
Said Katie, there is this really interesting thing called Fechner's law, which suggests that our perception of changes in a stimulus is often proportional to a stimulus rather than an absolute. So you'll notice adding one candle to a dark room, but adding one candle to a brightly lit room may not be as noticeable. So things with really strong taste and smell, often quite divisive, right? So durian, coriander for taste, I know some people hate that, Marmite or Vegemite. Katie, where are you on Vegemite?
I'm in the pro camp, love it.
I want to know if there's something you absolutely love or hate the smell of that other people don't really get.
This is kind of weird, but I have like a hard time with the way that people smell sometimes. Like not like a hygiene thing, not like a body odor thing. I think my cousin seems to have had a similar experience when she was pregnant. Like she wanted her husband to stay away from her because she could smell his face. So I don't know if it's like a genetic thing or something.
Might be an evolutionary mechanism.
There is a there is a face cream, quite a nice face cream, that I think smells of urine. And a while back, I was in Switzerland interviewing, he was called the Indiana Jones of smell. And he's this guy that goes out into strange lands to sniff out new chemicals that you can put into perfumes. And he wafted this bottle under my nose and said, "Can you smell this?" And I said, "No." And he went, "Oh, you are a nosnik." So one of my receptors doesn't work. So it's kind of like if smell were a rainbow, maybe I'm just missing light blue, but all the other colours are there. And I always wonder whether that face cream that I won't name, I wonder if there's a note in there that I can't grasp that would make it smell totally different if I could.
You mentioned coriander, though. It was a woman I met recently who said that coriander tasted soapy to her. I actually almost sent this to you guys for a question because I got really fascinated by it, but I guess it's an actual genetic thing.
With coriander, it comes down to a single nucleotide polymorphism, or an SNP, which is a specific part of your DNA. And almost if that's switched on or off determines whether or not you like coriander or whether or not it smells or tastes to you like soap or detergent. So clearly she had that.
So, before we go, because we are near the end of the programme, I should just squeeze in a personal pick. This is a chance to share a story that I've been chewing over that fits in with our original theme, and I should remind you that theme is the return of a long-lost book, and I reckon for a show themed around that, there hasn't been nearly enough book chat. Let me rectify that. Can I share that I have a problem with books, more specifically with reading, which used to be something that I do in preference to pretty much anything else as a kid, and now it's more like a chore to read, and I'm not alone. A recent radio series on the BBC picked at that nagging feeling that maybe our phones have replaced reading as a pull on our free time. From that series, here's FT data journalist John Burns-Murdoch, whose columns I can still manage to read, which is possibly because they're graph-based.
I think the evidence on this is really solid. Multiple sources here all show something very similar. So I've looked at the American Time Use Survey, where people are asked to keep a diary of how they're spending every 5 minutes of their day. And this shows that the share of people who spend any time at all sitting down and reading long-form material has come down from about 30% on any given day down to about 15%, that's a halving. And we see that in the UK, data from the National Literacy Trust shows that the share of children and young people who read daily in their free time has come down from about, well, more than 40% in the early 2010s to less than 20%.
There we go. The depressing reality, we are reading less. Katie, Tristan, either of you part of this stat?
I wish I wasn't, but yes, I am. Every year these days, my resolution is to try and read more books, and I think I'm up to number 2 this year. We're in August.
I had the same problem, but for me it was just kind of recognizing it and saying like I'm going to do this, and to some degree it just became a habit to get back into. So I think I was going down that same path, and eventually, yeah, I mean I'm probably still reading about a book every week to 2 weeks now. But I'm sure phones and everything have a big role in it. But I also think to some degree it's kind of, we don't really have a lot of time off work. I mean, what are the stats? Like most people have less time off work than medieval peasants. It's hard to find time to read, you're just tired.
Well, I don't know how much we can blame our phones. It's much harder to unpick whether it's the quality of, say, the passivity of the cat videos that you're watching on your phone rather than your phone per se. What I want to share is Professor Marianne Wolf, who's a cognitive neuroscientist at UCLA in the States. And here she is with the wondrous ways reading shapes our brains to begin with.
It took 2,000 years to move from hieroglyphs in Sumerian to an alphabet. Our children are given only 2,000 days to come up with the same basic epiphany that moved from a symbol to an alphabet. But what the children are beginning to do is to realize, number 1, that words are made of sounds. Number 2, that these sounds can be represented by letters, and that when you put all those letters together, they make words. And when you put the words together, you make whole thoughts. So the first basic reading circuit is when you have put 4 of those areas together: motor, vision, language, and cognition. Slowly, as the brain gets more and more automatic, there's time to think about what you're reading, and with that comes time to feel about what you're reading.
So books have a lot to offer us, and yet we're finding them harder to read. That's the short of it. I'm attempting a fight back. So Naomi Alderman, she's a science broadcaster, and she's also written many novels that have been turned into films, and she wrote an app that helps you run faster by immersing you in a world where you're chased by zombies. She's got strong views on preserving reading skills. Take a listen to this.
The generation now who are being raised by smartphones or by people who are staring at their smartphones all the time and who are being encouraged to interact with these technologies as early as possible will never forgive us for what we are doing to them. For children and young people, the key thing is to develop those early skills of literacy, to be introduced to the ways that you can use your mind in conjunction with text. This is what enables you to have a mind that has value in the world and will continue to have value, whatever the AI can do, whatever the influencers are saying. To be able to use your brain well is the greatest gift that you will ever have.
I love that. So Naomi has started something called Couch to 5K for reading. Couch to 5K is one of those programs where you try and build up to running 5K by doing a little and often and building it up. And this is the equivalent, but it's like an 8-week program, so you do 10 to 15 minutes twice a day, and I'm going to start it. I meant to start it last week and I couldn't, but I'm declaring it here, and I'm going to be publicly shamed if I don't.
I'll do it with you, Marnie. I think that sounds great.
Excellent.
I want to do that one alongside the Couch to 5K for running.
Or I could do double the reading and none of the running, because that's not the right way to do it.
Anything's good.
So yes, an overdue library book turned 150 years late had us exploring overdue earthquakes, lost and found meteorites, and a new library for the code we didn't know we needed to archive. I've also added penguin vaccinator to my list of alternative careers and raced through the joys of reading and how I'm going to fight the lure of my phone. Big thanks to this week's panellists in Sydney, Australia, Katie Silver.
Thanks for having me, Marnie.
And in Helsinki, Finland, thank you, Tristan Arto.
Kiitos, Ovaha.
I'm Marnie Chesterton. This week's producer was Lucy Davis with Ella Hubber, Imi Harper and Robbie Wojciechowski. Do join us next week for more Unexpected Elements.
This is the BBC World Service, exploring how we live in a changing climate.
How can architects protect the city from catastrophic fires? I couldn't recognize my neighborhood. A year and a half on from the firestorms which ravaged the city, I'll be speaking to the people building back their neighborhoods and creating homes which can survive in an age of fire.
LA rising from the ashes, Thursday at 8:30 and 19 GMT. In 30 minutes, Dear Daughter with Namolanta Kombo. Tamaki tells me about her daughter's coming of age ceremony, the reunion with old friends, the beautiful kimonos, and the photo shoot that almost didn't happen. All wrapped up in Japanese tradition. The newsroom is next. This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
This is Alex Ritson with the newsroom. At least 16 people are confirmed dead in a Russian double-tap drone attack on the hometown of Ukraine's President Zelensky. A rescue operation is currently underway. This is an absolute atrocity committed by the Russians. They're nothing but beasts. We will definitely respond. Donald Trump wins the latest round in his battle to continue construction of a huge ballroom on the side of the White House. Fears grow over the record-breaking El Niño weather system.
The tropical Pacific is warming faster than I've ever seen. We think that when it peaks, it's likely to be a record event, unprecedented, beyond anything we've seen in living memory.
2 huge fines for tech companies as Europe punishes Uber and TikTok incurs official US wrath. And not a royal soap opera, but a hit Netflix comedy. Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, is said to be on the verge of a return to acting. First, the news.
BBC News with Fiona MacDonald. Last-ditch trade talks between the US and Canada have failed to reach an agreement, and 50% US tariffs on a range of Canadian goods will now come into effect. The US Trade Representative, Jameson Greer, said Canada had declined to finalise a trade deal and accused Ottawa of, as he put it, continuing its retaliation.
Of wounded has been increasing. More than 100 people who were hurt in this, as well as those killed. It looks like a classic example of the worst kind of double tap attack, as it is called. We've had footage from the scene verified, which shows the first drone hitting the shopping centre, an explosion and a fire, and then President Zelensky said it was half an hour later that a second drone hit the centre once the first emergency responders were there trying to treat those who'd already been wounded. The video of that shows another, what appears to be a Shahed jet-powered drone diving from the sky towards the centre. You can actually hear Ukrainian soldiers or air defence units trying to shoot it down with machine gun fire, but they were unsuccessful, so that second drone has hit, causing more deaths and more injuries. The president, who is actually from Kryvyi Rih, the city where this happened, said this was a cynical attack and that he's been talking to the UN Secretary General. I think that was a call that was set up anyway, but he's used the opportunity to highlight what he said was the Russian targeting of civilians in such a clear and cynical way.
Trying to shoot a drone like this down with machine guns doesn't sound ideal. I mean, are there better ways, and does Kyiv have the technology that it needs?
Air defences across Ukraine have been overstretched, particularly in terms of incoming missiles. The record in shooting down drones had been better. We know an air raid alert had gone out in Kryvyi Rih, the city where the shopping centre was. There's actually been an investigation launched, the regional head of government has said, into why that centre was still open and some of the stores were open despite the air raid alert. That's an indication of how relaxed some Ukrainians have become, because after 4.5 years of hearing those sirens, not everybody reacts as suddenly as perhaps they would have at the start of this. But this is a jet-powered drone. We understand at least that second one that we've been able to see on video. That is a relatively new innovation from the Russians. They've taken the old propeller-powered, motor-powered Shahed, which was relatively slow-moving. They've put a jet engine on that instead, which means it moves much faster and is much harder to shoot down. And by the time they're effectively firing at it with a machine gun from the back of a 4x4, that is really a last desperate effort to try to bring down a drone to save people. But by that point, it was already heading for its target, and there was very little chance of actually stopping it doing the further damage that was inflicted.
Dan Johnson in Kyiv. Donald Trump has won the latest round in an ongoing legal battle over his sprawling plans to rebuild part of the White House. The US Supreme Court says work can temporarily resume on a massive 8,400 square metre ballroom, a key part of the president's plans to extensively reshape the US Capitol. The decision allows judges more time to weigh up an emergency appeal by the Trump administration after a lower court ruling demanded a halt to construction by Friday. Oliver Conway asked our White House reporter Bernd de Boosman for his assessment of the latest ruling.
What the action is known, it's called an administrative stay, and it really gives the justices time to consider the administration's broader request to let work continue on the ballroom. But President Trump will certainly be very pleased. In recent days, he's really been framing this not only as a ballroom as it was initially envisioned when it was announced last year, but more as a national security complex that he says is kind of vital to protect presidents and their families and important guests in the future. From where I'm sitting just outside the White House, I can see the two massive cranes over what used to be the East Room of the White House. Last week, the administration's attorneys said that the work was about 65% done, and since then, reporters